The sun setting over the scarred battlefield of northern Burkina Faso, smoke still rising from the earth, the metallic smell of blood mixing with dust. And there, walking among the fallen heroes, is Captain Ibrahim Traoré, his boots heavy with mud and grief, his eyes scanning face after face of his brothers in arms who had given everything for their nation. The wind carries the sound of distant weeping from families who have just learned they will never see their sons again. Ibrahim's jaw is clenched, his fist tight. He has seen war. He has seen death. But nothing could prepare him for what he was about to find lying there among the bodies. His favorite soldier, the one who believed in the revolution more than anyone, the one who made others laugh even in the darkest hours, the one who had saved Ibrahim's life twice before, now lying motionless, his uniform soaked in blood, his weapon still clutched in his hand. But in that moment, what would he do? Would he continue walking like a commander who has hardened his heart to loss? Would he salute and move on as military protocol demands? Or would something break inside this future president of Burkina Faso? Stay with me, because this story will leave you in tears. What Ibrahim Traoré did in those next moments would not only shock every soldier present, but it would eventually ripple across the entire nation, reminding millions what true leadership really means. The battle had ended hours ago, but the battlefield remained a place of chaos. Medical teams rushed between the wounded, trying desperately to save those who could still be saved. Commanders shouted orders. Helicopters thundered overhead. But Captain Ibrahim Traoré moved slowly, deliberately through the carnage. He insisted on seeing every fallen soldier personally, not reading names from a list, not waiting for reports. He walked among them. These young men who had followed him into hell, who had trusted his leadership, who had believed in his vision of a free Burkina Faso, no longer controlled by foreign interests or corrupt elites. Ibrahim's hands trembled slightly as he bent down beside each body, checking identification tags, memorizing faces. These were not just soldiers. They were teachers who had left their classrooms, farmers who had abandoned their fields, students who had postponed their dreams. All because they believed in something greater than themselves. And then he saw him. Sergeant Moussa Diallo, 27 years old, 3 years of service, 2 children at home, a wife who was 7 months pregnant with her 3rd child. But more than that, Moussa was the soldier who had questioned Ibrahim's tactics only to be proven wrong, then apologized with such humility that it earned him Ibrahim's deepest respect. Moussa was the one who distributed his own food rations to hungry civilians in villages they liberated. Moussa was the one who sang revolutionary songs so loudly that entire battalions would join in, their voices echoing across the savannah. Moussa was the one who, just 2 weeks ago, had pulled Ibrahim from a burning vehicle seconds before it exploded. "A country cannot afford to lose you, Captain," Moussa had said, his face blackened with soot, grinning through the smoke. "You are the future. I am just a soldier." Now, Moussa lay on the red earth, his eyes closed, his chest still, his face peaceful, as if he were merely sleeping. 3 bullet wounds across his torso. He had charged forward to protect his unit's retreat. Witnesses later said he had held his position alone for nearly 10 minutes, giving his brothers time to reorganize. He had died exactly as he had lived, putting others before himself. Ibrahim stood frozen, staring down at his favorite soldier. Around him, other officers continued their grim duties. But Ibrahim could not move, could not breathe, could not process this reality. His mind flooded with memories. Moussa teaching younger soldiers how to properly clean their weapons. Moussa laughing at terrible jokes around the campfire. Moussa speaking passionately about what Burkina Faso could become if corruption was eliminated and sovereignty restored. Moussa showing everyone a crumpled photo of his children, his eyes shining with pride and love. A colonel approached Ibrahim, saluting stiffly. "Captain, we have identified 32 fallen. Sergeant Diallo among them. Shall I proceed with standard protocols?" Ibrahim did not respond. He could not tear his eyes away from Mousa's face. The colonel cleared his throat. "Captain, The families are waiting for notification. "We need to leave us," Ibrahim said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir," I said, "leave us." Ibrahim's voice cracked slightly. "Everyone, give me a moment." The colonel hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with this breach of military procedure. But something in Ibrahim's eyes made him obey. He signaled to the others, and slowly the area around Mousa's body cleared. Soldiers stepped back. Medics moved to other sections. The noise of the battlefield seemed to fade away. Ibrahim stood alone with his fallen friend. He knelt down slowly, his knees sinking into the blood-soaked earth. He removed his military cap, placing it over his heart. His shoulders began to shake. This man who had led charges against superior forces. This man who had survived ambushes and explosions. This man who would one day lead an entire nation through revolution. This man was now weeping over the body of a soldier. "Moussa," Ibrahim whispered, his voice breaking. "Brother, how do I explain this to your children? How do I tell them their father died so other children could live free? How do I tell your wife that the nation needed you more than your unborn child?" The wind carried away his words, but not his grief. Witnesses later said they had never seen Captain Traoré show such emotion. He was known for his stoic determination, his strategic brilliance, his unwavering resolve. But here, kneeling beside Sergeant Diallo, he was simply a man mourning a friend. But nobody expected what he would do next. Ibrahim reached down and took Mousa's hand, still warm despite death. He held it tightly, as if trying to transfer life back into his friend through sheer force of will. His other hand moved to Mousa's face, gently closing his eyes more fully, smoothing his hair, adjusting his uniform with infinite tenderness. "I promise you," Ibrahim said, his voice stronger now, filled with terrible determination. "Your sacrifice will not be forgotten. Your children will grow up in the Burkina Faso you died creating. I swear on my life, brother. I swear it on everything I am." What happened in those next hours would challenge everything the military establishment believed about proper conduct and protocol. As Ibrahim continued to kneel beside Mousa's body, refusing to move, refusing to follow standard military procedures, tension began to build among the commanding officers. This was not how things were done. This was not how a captain should behave on a battlefield. The dead were to be processed efficiently, documented properly, and removed quickly. Emotion was a luxury the military could not afford. Major General Buddha, a career military man with 30 years of service and very traditional views about military discipline, strode toward Ibrahim with barely contained frustration. His boots pounded the earth with authoritative purpose. Other officers followed at a respectful distance, curious to see how this confrontation would unfold. "Captain Traoré," the general barked, "what is the meaning of this? You have responsibilities. We have procedures. You cannot simply kneel in the dirt like a civilian. You are an officer." Ibrahim did not look up. His hand remained on Mousa's chest, as if guarding him. "Captain, I am speaking to you." Finally, Ibrahim raised his head. His face was streaked with dirt and tears, but his eyes blazed with something the general had never seen before. A mixture of grief and defiance, so powerful it made the older man take an involuntary step backward. "He has a name," Ibrahim said quietly. "He is not just the dead. He is Sergeant Moussa Diallo. He has a pregnant wife, 2 children, dreams, hopes. He loved his country so much he gave everything for it. And you want me to process him like paperwork?" The general's face reddened. Around them, soldiers stopped their work, watching this unprecedented confrontation between traditional military authority and something new, something they did not yet have words for. "That is exactly what I expect, Captain. We all have lost friends. This is war. You dishonor his sacrifice by making a spectacle of grief. You undermine discipline. You set a dangerous example for the men." Other officers murmured agreement. This was the military way. Strength meant suppressing emotion. Leadership meant maintaining distance. You could not lead soldiers if you loved them too deeply, because then you could not send them to die. But Ibrahim slowly stood, never taking his eyes from the general. When he spoke, his voice carried across the battlefield, and every soldier present heard him clearly. "You are wrong, General." Gasps rippled through the gathered men. No one spoke to the general this way. "You are wrong," Ibrahim repeated, louder now. "We have been wrong for decades. We have treated our soldiers like expendable resources, like bullets to be fired and forgotten. We have sent young men to die for corrupt politicians while calling it patriotism. We have demanded they sacrifice everything while their families starve. We have asked for their blood while foreign powers steal our gold. And we wonder why our military has failed to protect our people." The general's hand moved toward his sidearm. "Captain, you are coming dangerously close to insubordination." Insubordination. Ibrahim's laugh was bitter. Moussa Diallo died fighting terrorists armed with weapons our own government sold to them through corrupt deals. He died protecting villages our own military had abandoned because there was no money to bribe the commanders. He died believing in a Burkina Faso that does not yet exist because men like you are more concerned with protocol than justice. The battlefield had gone completely silent now. Medics stopped working. Other officers stood frozen. Junior soldiers watched with wide eyes, hardly believing what they were hearing. "I will not leave him," Ibrahim continued, his voice dropping to something harder, colder. "I will carry him myself to the transport. I will personally notify his family. I will look his children in the eyes and tell them their father was a hero. And I will make damn sure his sacrifice means something." The general's face had gone from red to purple. His career had been built on the old system, the old ways. This young captain was threatening everything he believed in. "If you defy direct orders, Captain Traoré, I will have you arrested for, then arrest me." Ibrahim spread his arms wide. "Arrest me in front of every soldier here. Show them what the military really values. Show them that following orders matters more than honoring our dead. Show them that we are exactly what the people think we are. Just another instrument of oppression." For several long seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. The general's hand hovered over his sidearm. His face twisted with rage and indecision. Around them, dozens of soldiers watched. And in that moment, everyone present understood they were witnessing something historic. This was not just an argument between two officers. This was a clash between two visions of what the military could be. Young Lieutenant Crockett, barely 22 years old, suddenly stepped forward and saluted Ibrahim. "Permission to help carry Sergeant Diallo, Captain." Another soldier stepped forward, then another, then 10 more. 20. Within moments, nearly 50 soldiers had broken rank and moved to stand with Ibrahim Traoré. The general stared at this mutiny in disbelief. His authority was dissolving before his eyes. And then, in front of everyone, he made a choice that shocked the entire crowd. The general slowly lowered his hand from his weapon. His shoulders slumped slightly, as if a great weight had suddenly pressed down upon him. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost defeated. "Do what you must, Captain, but know this. What you start here today will have consequences far beyond this battlefield." Ibrahim nodded slowly. "I am counting on it, General." What happened next would become legend among Burkina Faso's military and, soon enough, among its people. Ibrahim Traoré bent down and, with the same care a father uses when lifting a sleeping child, slid his arms beneath Moussa Diallo's body. He lifted him from the red earth, a captain carrying a sergeant, an officer bearing a soldier. The symbolism burned itself into every heart that saw it. He did not rush. He did not hand the body to medics or order others to take the weight. He carried Moussa himself, slowly, deliberately, as though the entire nation were watching, because one day the entire nation would watch. The 50 soldiers who had stepped forward fell in around him without a word being spoken. They formed two silent lines, an honor guard born not of regulation, but of something deeper, something older than any army manual. Lieutenant Crockett walked closest, his young face streaked with tears he no longer tried to hide. Ibrahim adjusted Mouse's uniform one last time, making sure the collar was straight the name tape visible, the dog tags gleaming even in the dying light. Then he began to walk. With every step across that broken battlefield, something extraordinary unfolded. Soldiers who had been loading stretchers stopped and came to attention. Medics paused with bloodied hands. Helicopter crews banked low, pilots tipping their wings in respect. One by one, then 10 by 10, men left their duties and joined the procession. No one gave the order. No one needed to. A low hum rose from the ranks. Lieutenant Connate again. He began to sing the old song of resistance, the one their grandfathers had sung against colonial rule. His voice cracked at first, then steadied. Another voice joined, then 20, then 100. Soon 200 men were singing, their voices rolling like thunder across the savannah, carrying grief and pride in equal measure. Ibrahim's arms never trembled. Tears streamed down his face, cutting clean lines through the dust and blood, but his stride stayed strong. Love, it seemed, made the impossible weight feel light. 20 minutes it took to reach the evacuation zone, 20 minutes that felt like 20 years. When they arrived, Ibrahim did not lower Moussa onto the pile with the others. He walked straight to the waiting truck, climbed the ramp himself, and laid his brother down with infinite gentleness. He crossed Mousa's hands over his chest, smoothed the fabric one final time, and whispered something no one else could hear. Only then did he step back. He raised his hand in salute and held it. Not the sharp flick of routine, but a long, trembling salute that seemed to pull the pain from his chest and offer it to the sky. Behind him, 200 soldiers mirrored him, a living wall of raised hands against the blood-orange sun. In that single frozen moment, something broke open in the soul of the army. The old lie, that hardness equals strength, that tears equal weakness, that soldiers are tools, shattered like thin glass. Major General Buddha stood at the edge of the crowd, watching. 30 years of service, 30 years of believing that emotion had no place on a battlefield, and now something cracked inside his chest too. He felt it, an actual ache, as though a rib had snapped under the weight of what he was seeing. When the singing finally faded and the men began to drift away, their heads high despite their grief, the general approached Ibrahim. His steps were slower now, uncertain. "Captain Traoré," he said, voice rough, almost hoarse. I owe you an apology. Not for upholding protocol. Protocol has its place, but for forgetting what protocol is meant to protect." He paused, swallowed hard. "Humanity. I forgot it should serve humanity, not strangle it." Ibrahim looked at him, exhausted, hollowed out, yet somehow taller than he had ever been. "With respect, General," he answered quietly, "we do not need new protocols. We need new hearts. We need to remember that every man who wears this uniform is someone's son, someone's father, someone's hope. We fight for people, not for flags that politicians hide behind." The general held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible movement. In his eyes flickered the first faint light of understanding, the first spark of change. Word of the battlefield procession spread faster than radio signals. By nightfall, every barracks in the north had heard some version of it. By morning, the story had reached Ouagadougou. Soldiers who had never met Moussa Diallo repeated his name like a prayer. They spoke of the captain who carried his soldier home, who wept without shame, who stood against a general and refused to abandon the dead. Something shifted inside the ranks. Junior officers began asking their men about their villages, their children, their dreams. Commanders who once sent typed condolences now visited hospital beds themselves. When the next soldier fell, his body was not zipped into a bag and forgotten. It was escorted by brothers who sang all the way to the grave. And at the center of this quiet revolution stood Ibrahim Traoré, still leading patrols, still planning operations, but now carrying something new in his eyes, an unbreakable promise forged in Mousa's blood. Weeks turned into months. The military changed from within, the way a river carves stone, slow, relentless, unstoppable. Then came the funeral. Ibrahim insisted on attending. No matter the risk, no matter the distance. He drove through the night to reach the small village where Mousa's family waited. When he arrived, dust-covered and unshaven, he went straight to the widow, Aissata, who stood in the courtyard holding her two small children. The third, a boy, had been born 3 weeks after Moussa died. Aissata's eyes were dry now. She had cried herself empty. When she saw Ibrahim, something softened in her face. "You came," she whispered. "I gave him my word," Ibrahim answered. He knelt, so he was eye level with the children. "Your father was the bravest man I ever knew," he told them. "He saved my life. He saved many lives. And he asked me to make sure you would grow up in a country worthy of his sacrifice." The little girl, no more than 5, reached out and touched the medals on Ibrahim's chest. "Will you bring Papa back?" she asked. Ibrahim's throat closed. He pulled her into his arms, then the boy, holding them both while their mother watched. "I cannot bring him back," he said, voice breaking again. "But I can spend the rest of my life making sure no one ever forgets him. And I can fight so that one day you'll be proud to say his name." That evening, hundreds of soldiers arrived. They came in trucks, on motorcycles, some on foot. They formed a corridor of green uniforms from the family compound all the way to the burial ground. When the simple wooden coffin was carried out, every soldier snapped to attention. No officer ordered it. It simply happened. Ibrahim spoke over the open grave. His words were not polished. They did not need to be. Moussa Diallo did not die for politicians who sell our future. He did not die for generals who count bodies instead of lives. He died for you, he said, turning to the children. He died for every child who will never have to flee their village at night. He died for a Burkina Faso that still lives only in our hearts, but one day will live in our land. He looked out over the crowd of soldiers, villagers, elders, mourners. "I promise all of you, on the blood of this good man, his death will have meaning. We will build the country he saw when he closed his eyes, or we will die trying." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Then a single voice shouted, "Traoré." Others took it up. "Traoré! Traoré!" Ibrahim raised a hand, silencing them. "No," he said firmly. "Not my name. His name." He pointed to the coffin. "Say it with me." And hundreds of voices, soldiers and civilians together, thundered across the village. "Moussa! Moussa Diallo!" Aissata finally wept then, but she was smiling through the tears. She understood. Her husband had not simply died. He had lit a fire. Someone recorded the funeral on a phone. By the next morning, the video was everywhere, passed from phone to phone, shown in markets, played in taxis, watched in secret by students and farmers and mothers who had lost their own sons. In a country weary of empty speeches and stolen wealth, here was something real. Here was a soldier's officer who wept, who carried the dead, who promised revolution with tears on his face. T-shirts appeared in the markets. Ibrahim walking with Moussa in his arms, the words beneath reading, "True leaders carry their fallen." Songs were composed. Murals bloomed on walls in Ouagadougou and Bobo Dioulasso. Children who had never held a gun began to speak the names Traoré and Diallo the way earlier generations had spoken of Sankara. And in barracks across the country, young soldiers looked at their officers with new eyes. They began to ask questions, dangerous questions. If Captain Traoré can love one soldier this much, what would he do for all of us? If he can stand against a general for the sake of honor, what would he do against a president who sells the nation? If he keeps his promise to one widow, might he keep his promise to an entire people? The military high command watched the tide rise with growing alarm. Ibrahim Traoré was no longer just a captain. He had become a symbol, and symbols are harder to arrest than men. Some generals called for his transfer to a remote post. Others suggested promotion, hoping to buy his silence with rank. But the soldiers made both plans impossible. Quietly, carefully, loyalties shifted. Units began refusing operations that smelled of political corruption. Patrols suddenly found new courage when they knew Traoré's name was spoken in the villages they protected. 18 months after Moussa Diallo breathed his last on the red earth of the north, the storm finally broke. But that is a story for another part. The months after Moussa Diallo's funeral did not bring peace. They brought a slow, burning awakening. In every corner of Burkina Faso, people carried the same short video on cracked phone screens. A captain in dusty fatigues, tears cutting rivers through the grime on his cheeks, lifting a dead sergeant into his arms as 200 soldiers sang behind him. They watched it at night by the light of kerosene lamps. They watched it in cyber cafes when the power stayed on long enough. They watched it in silence, then played it again and again until the battery died. Something deep and long buried began to stir. In the villages, mothers who had lost sons to jihadists or to hunger started speaking openly about the gold leaving their soil while their children died of malaria. In the barracks, young lieutenants and sergeants met after lights out and asked one another the question no one had dared ask in years. Who exactly are we dying for? And in the presidential palace, the men who had grown fat on foreign contracts felt the first cold touch of fear. Ibrahim Traoré did not ask for any of this. He simply kept doing what he had always done, leading from the front, knowing every soldier by name, refusing to send men where he would not go himself, and never, ever letting the death of a brother pass as routine. But the army was changing under his feet like dry earth before rain. One night, in a forward operating base near Djibo, a young corporal approached him after evening roll call. The boy could not have been older than 20. "Captain," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder, "the men want to know, when do we stop pretending?" Ibrahim studied the corporal's face in the lantern light. "Stop pretending what? That we serve the people. That the government cares about anything except Swiss bank accounts. That another patrol, another coffin, another empty promise will ever be enough." Ibrahim said nothing for a long time. Then he placed a hand on the corporal's shoulder. "When the time comes," he answered quietly, "you will know. And when you know, you will not be alone." That was all. No speeches, no plotting in dark rooms. Just a promise spoken man to man, the way Moussa Diallo had once spoken to him. The promise spread anyway. Letters began arriving at Ibrahim's quarters. Scraps of paper pushed under doors, notes hidden in ammunition boxes, messages scrawled on cigarette packets. Soldiers from units he had never met wrote the same words again and again. "We are ready, Captain. Your orders, brother. Tell us when." He burned every letter after reading it. He slept less. He watched the moon more. Then came the incident that broke the final barrier. A convoy carrying food and medicine to displaced families in the Somme province was ambushed. The escort unit lost 8 men. The supplies were looted. Within hours, television footage showed the Minister of Defense blaming logistical difficulties while, in the background, brand-new armored vehicles bought with French loans sat and used in Ouagadougou because a general's cousin had not yet received his commission. That same night, soldiers in 3 separate garrisons refused to return to barracks until the minister resigned. When military police were sent to restore order, the police put down their batons and joined the protesters. The regime panicked. Tanks rolled into the capital. Curfews were declared. Foreign advisors whispered about contagion from Mali and Niger. And in the middle of that growing storm, a phone call reached Ibrahim Traoré at 2:17 a.m. It was Lieutenant Crockett, the same young officer who had been first to step forward on the battlefield the day Moussa died. "Captain," Crockett said, voice trembling with exhaustion and something that sounded like hope. "The men have taken the radio station in Bobo de Lasso. They are playing the video of you carrying Sergeant Diallo on repeat. They are reading the names of every soldier killed since the war began. The whole city is in the streets. They are asking for you." Ibrahim closed his eyes. He saw Mousa's peaceful face on the red earth. He heard Aissata's children asking if he could bring their papa back. He felt the weight in his arms that love had once made light. "Tell them I am coming," he said. At dawn the next day, columns of vehicles left their bases without official orders. Soldiers removed the old national flags from their antennas and tied simple green cloth in their place. They drove toward Ouagadougou. No one fired on them. At every checkpoint, the guards stepped aside, saluted, and asked to join. By noon, half the army was moving. The president tried to flee by helicopter. The pilot, a captain who had once served under Ibrahim, refused to start the engines. "This aircraft belongs to the people now," he announced over the radio for the whole city to hear. When Ibrahim Traoré's convoy reached the gates of the capital, the streets were already full. People stood on rooftops, on cars, on each other's shoulders. They did not cheer at first. They simply watched, as though afraid the moment might vanish if they made sound. Then an old woman near the front raised her fist and shouted one word, "Moussa." The name rolled forward like a wave. 10,000 voices took it up. 20,000. 100,000. "Moussa! Moussa Diallo!" Ibrahim stepped down from the lead vehicle. He was still in combat fatigues, still dusty from the road. He looked tired, human, breakable, and yet the crowd parted for him as though he carried the nation's entire future on his shoulders. He walked to the steps of the national television station where soldiers had raised a simple banner for the fallen, for the living, for Burkina Faso. A microphone was pressed into his hand. The whole country waited. He did not speak about power. He did not speak about himself. He spoke about a battlefield in the north, about a sergeant who gave his rations to hungry children, about a promise made to a pregnant widow, about children who deserved to grow up in a country their father had died believing in. Then he said the words that would be carved into school walls and sung in markets for generations. "Today we do not take power. Today we give it back, back to the people, back to the villages, back to every mother who has buried a son while politicians grew fat. Today we begin keeping the promise I made to Moussa Diallo and to every brother who fell beside him." The roar that followed shook the city. There was no battle. There was no need. By nightfall, the old regime had dissolved like salt and rain. At 34 years of age, Captain Ibrahim Traoré became President Ibrahim Traoré, not because he wanted a palace, but because a nation looked at him carrying a dead soldier in his arms and decided that this was what leadership was supposed to feel like. But the story did not end there. Far from it. Part 4. The first night he spent in the presidential palace, Ibrahim Traoré did not sleep in the president's bedroom. He walked through the empty corridors until he found a small room that had once been used by guards. It had a narrow bed, a cracked window, and a view of the courtyard where ordinary soldiers now stood watch. He lay down fully dressed, boots still on, and stared at the ceiling until sunrise. He was president now, but he felt only the weight of a promise made to a dead man. In the weeks that followed, the world expected speeches, parades, new flags. They got something quieter, something fiercer. Foreign military bases were given 90 days to leave. When French officers protested, Ibrahim invited them to national television and played, without commentary, the battlefield video of him carrying Moussa Diallo. Then he looked straight into the camera and said, "Our brothers died so that no foreign boot would ever again walk over their graves. The deadline stands." Mining contracts signed in secret were torn up in public. Executives who threatened lawsuits were handed the phone numbers of Moussa's children and told, "Explain to them why your prophet is worth more than their father's blood." None of them called. Corrupt generals and ministers who had fled to Europe discovered their bank accounts frozen. The money was transferred the same week into a fund called the Children of Moussa Diallo, scholarships, clinics, wells, schools. Every brick laid, every child taught carried a small plaque in memory of Sergeant Moussa Diallo and all who fell for a sovereign Burkina Faso. Every year, on the anniversary of the battle where Moussa died, President Traoré disappears from Ouagadougou. No motorcade, no journalists. He drives himself north in a simple pickup. He goes first to the battlefield, now quiet, grass growing over the scars. He kneels at the exact spot where he once found his friend, places a single sheaf of millet and a photograph of Moussa's children, and stays there until the stars come out. Then he drives to the village. Aissata is no longer the hollow-eyed widow who once greeted him with dry eyes. Her compound has grown. The children run to meet the pickup before it stops. The eldest boy, now tall and serious, salutes with perfect form. The girl, the one who once asked if the captain could bring Papa back, now studies medicine in the capital on a scholarship that bears her father's name. They eat together on mats under the neem tree. Rice, sauce, laughter, stories. Ibrahim tells them about their father's terrible jokes, about how Moussa could make an entire platoon sing off-key and proud. The youngest child, the one born after the battle, falls asleep against Ibrahim's side every single time. Before he leaves, he always takes Aissata aside. "I still carry him," he tells her quietly. "Every day. I always will. And he is proud of you," she answers. The same words every year, tears shining but never falling now. We all are. In Ouagadougou, a monument stands where the old statue of a forgotten colonial governor once looked down on the people. It is simple bronze, a soldier walking, head bowed, carrying his fallen brother in his arms. No names on the base, just one line. "They carried us so we could stand." Children play around it. Old men sit in its shade and argue about politics. Lovers meet beneath it at dusk. No one ever defaces it. No one needs to be told whose story it tells. When foreign journalists ask President Traoré how a captain became a revolutionary, how a single act of grief toppled a system, he never talks about strategy or timing or international support. He gives the same answer every time, voice low, almost a whisper, as though he is still kneeling on that blood-red earth. "I learned everything I needed to know the day I carry my brother home. Love is heavier than any weapon, stronger than any fear, louder than any crowd." When a leader loves the people enough to cry for one fallen soldier, the people will love him enough to change the world. And Burkina Faso keeps changing slowly, painfully, beautifully, because a nation once saw a man refuse to leave his friend behind on a battlefield and decided that kind of heart was worth following into the fire. Moussa Diallo never saw the new schools, the reclaimed mines, the children who now drink clean water because gold no longer disappears in the night. But every time a little girl in a village classroom reads her first sentence, every time a farmer sells his millet at a fair price, every time a soldier stands guard, knowing his family will never go hungry again, Moussa is there. He is in the promise that was kept. He is in the weight that love made light. He is in the heart of a president who still, late at night when the palace is quiet, closes his eyes and feels the warmth of a brother's body in his arms, and whispers the same words he whispered on the red earth all those years ago. "I kept my word, brother. Your children are free, and we are only getting started." This is the story of Ibrahim Traoré and Moussa Diallo. A story of two brothers, one battlefield, one impossible promise, and a nation that learned that the strongest revolutions do not begin with bullets, but with tears that refuse to be silenced, with arms that refuse to let go, with a heart that decides one fallen soldier is worth carrying all the way home, and, if necessary, carrying an entire people into tomorrow. Thank you for walking this road with them. May we all have the courage, when the moment comes, to carry our fallen, to keep our promises, and to love something enough to change everything.